Hello, good morning, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining. If you are joining now, please feel free to say hello in the chat box. Yep, I can see. Oh, a very global community we have today. So continue saying hello as we just give it a couple of minutes to let everybody join. Welcome to Pearson English Spring Days. Maybe I can start by dispelling that myth that it always rains in England and just show you the view out of my window here. It's a beautiful spring day in South London. Very happy that you could join us today. Wow, I just saw hello from Ecuador. Some early birds joining from the western part of the world. Okay, I can still see a few people joining. So let's just give them a minute or two to join. My name's Mike Mayer. I'll repeat that again in a couple of minutes when everybody's joined. I see most of you have found the chat box already on the right-hand side of your screens. Please feel free to use that to chat, to ask questions, to interact with each other. It's the perfect opportunity to engage with teachers from around the world. So I think I can see numbers slightly slowing down now, so let's make a start. Before we start, I'm just moving on. Let me run through a few housekeeping rules. This webinar is being recorded, and so by joining you are consenting to being recorded. And then the follow-up after this webinar, so within 2 weeks, we have got quite a number of participants. So we've had 2 full weeks of events. So please allow us 2 weeks. We will be sending you a link to the recording of this webinar. We'll be sending you your certificate of attendance. And there will be a virtual goodie bag, so a link to some free online resources and information about Pearson products. Okay, so moving on. As you can see, I think when I logged into this platform that I managed to misspell my name. So you're seeing me as Mike Mayo there. My name is Mike Mayer, ending in an R. You can see that on your the main slide screen there. You'll also see the name Sarah Davila on that screen. That is one of my colleagues, and we prepared this presentation together. Sarah delivered this presentation last week. And one piece of learning that we took from that presentation was that when everybody on the presentation tries to access the GSE tools that we're going to show you at the same time, the website crashes. So at the top of your screen, you should see a red button that says GSE Teacher Toolkit. At some point during the first few slides of my presentation, please feel free to click on that website. That will take you to the GSE Teacher Toolkit, which is what I'm going to be talking about in some detail today. You don't all need to do it at this exact moment. Let's try and join the website gradually and avoid it crashing. So, as I say, my name is Mike Mayer. Please feel free to add your comments, add any questions into the chat as I'm going through this presentation. We'll come to a Q&A session at the end. We'll collect your questions. They'll be fed to me and we'll address those at the end. Feel free to say hi to each other. If anything I say inspires you to with any thoughts about your own experiences, again, please feel free to share them in the chat. Somebody's saying no presentation, so I'm hoping that you can see the slides on my screen. I'm sure somebody will let me know if you can't. So first of all, let's acknowledge the fact that we are currently in unusual times. Like many of you, I have been working from home for the past 2 months in lockdown. Yeah, these are unusual circumstances. And I'm sure many of you feel that you have just been thrown in at the deep end when it comes to technology, using technology in the classroom, and more importantly, when it comes to distance learning. This is not something that we've really experienced in the past. There are obviously language schools that do it, but for the majority of us who are language teachers, we're used to being in the classroom with our students. So we need to acknowledge that these are unusual times, that these are stressful times for teachers. Yeah, I see a comment there, great slide. Yes, it is. It feels like we're really diving in to the deep end. Many of us have been moving to teaching with technology over recent years, but I think the current situation has really forced us to accelerate that move in teaching with technology. But it's not all bad news. I mean, the good news is when it comes to teaching with technology, there has been a fair amount of research carried out over the past 20 plus years. So you can see we started thinking about this back in 1997. And whilst I'm not going to go into too much detail here, there are a few acronyms and terminology that you could search for online, and you'll find plenty of research around CAL or CALL, which is computer assisted language learning, MAL or MAL, which is mobile assisted language learning, and ITC, information and communication technology. So if you want to find out more about those technologies and the research behind them, please make a note of those and have a search online after this webinar. As I said, we are actually in quite unusual times, and we're all beginning really to learn more about online distance learning. So how are you running classrooms? How are you teaching? How are you tutoring online at distance? Sorry, let me advance. So just to give you a few tips from the research from CAL and MAL, and maybe to point out at this stage that if you go to the Pearson website, if you go to english.com website, over the past couple of months, we've been posting videos, webinars, tips, suggestions for how teachers can move their classes online and ways of engaging students at a distance. So if you want to find out more about that, I recommend you go to our websites, either pearson.com or english.com, which is more specific to English language teaching, and you can find lots of resources and suggestions there. But just some general kind of big picture points that come from the research. So engaging with technology, different technologies will suit different purposes. So for example, if you're teaching on mobile, you want to be using the features that are unique to mobile. So great for recording, great for taking photos, great for listening. Not so great if you're having to write an essay or long pieces of text. It's not great. It is great for just short chat messages, but not if you're working maybe with more academic students who need to be writing essays. So you need to consider what type of technology is best. Today we're using this presentation technology, great for giving webinars, but maybe if you're running your class, you want to actually be able to see your students. I have to say, as somebody who presents quite a bit, 95% of my time is face-to-face presenting. So I am finding it a little disconcerting that I can't actually see any of you or have eye contact with any of you. So that's something that I'm having to get used to. So really, you need to weigh up the pros and cons of different forms of technology and pick the one that's best suited to your needs. Even though we are at a distance and not physically together, and again, many of us who've been teaching over the past 20, 30 years, very much embracing the communicative approach and the collaborative approach to language learning, this is still possible if you're online. So interacting online and still ensuring that you're interacting, covering all of the 4 skills. So you know, speaking and listening, obviously that's what we're doing now, but also using things like the chat box, using your platform to exchange messages, posting things for students to read, sending them off, getting them to look for things on the internet, practicing their reading, and then summarizing and writing. So again, just because we're not physically together doesn't mean that we can't continue to encourage collaboration with our students. And then as teachers, you're all familiar with feedback and the fact that feedback is a key to ensuring that our students learn. So continuing to give feedback in online interaction. And really what we're going to be talking about today is setting clear goals, clear objectives for your lesson planning, and then being able to give feedback based on those goals. And so that's what we're going to dig into in this presentation today. So, creating progress with online learning. I'm sure when this current crisis hit all of us, you had a certain sinking feeling, you'd been preparing lessons for, or you'd prepared for the year, you'd got your course book, you knew what you were doing, and then it feels as though everything is being thrown into a black hole and you have to start again. Maybe the course book isn't appropriate for distance learning. Maybe you're having to create more content yourself, which is incredibly stressful and incredibly time-consuming. And so what I'm going to be showing you today is a teacher resource, a teacher toolkit that has been created to help teachers create lessons, help to inform you around what's appropriate for different types of learner and different levels of proficiency. This may be particularly appropriate in the current situation where more and more teachers are having to create their materials rather than rely on a course book, but everything that I'm going to be talking about today will be equally relevant once we all return to the classroom. So I'm not sure if I introduced my title, but I head up the Global Scale of English at Pearson. You can see a slide there which calls out the Global Scale of English and the CFR, which I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with, the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. And that has been a standard for language teaching, learning, and assessment around the world since around 2001. You can see that the Global Scale of English is sitting on top of the Common European Framework and is carefully aligned to the Common European Framework. The Global Scale of English is itself based on the Common European Framework. So it is the same underlying scale as the Common European Framework, but as you can see, it's a more numerical scale. And I'll explain why we think a numerical scale is useful when considering language teaching and assessment. If you look at this slide, you can see there's a couple of brackets at the bottom. So we've got a below A1 and A1, and we've got a B1 and a B2. And I'm just wondering if maybe in the chat, what you think is going on in this slide. What is the difference between A1 and B2, apart from the fact that they're different levels. What does this slide illustrate? I can see, thank you, I can see time. I can see time we need to learn. Great, that's exactly it. And so one thing that when I know a lot of teachers learning about the Common European Framework, being asked to use the Common European Framework increasingly by ministries of education outside of Europe, even though it was created for Europe, you're hearing A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, and that all sounds like those levels, those different proficiency levels are the same. And you would need the same amount of time to be able to move between A1 and A2 as you would between A2 and B1. And this isn't true. A little known fact about the Common European Framework is that A2, B1 and B2 actually have higher levels, plus levels. So you have A2 and you have A2 plus. You have B1 and you have B1 plus, B2 and B2 plus. And this is important because A2 and A2 plus is not one proficiency level divided in two. It's two proficiency levels being brought together and just called A2. But I'm sure as teachers, you've had the experience of getting your students from A1 to A2. That seems to be kind of okay. It seems reasonably quick. You get them to A2, and then when they get to A2 and you're trying to get them to B1, or they're at B1 and you're trying to get them to B2, things seem to slow down. We talk about the learning plateau, the intermediate plateau. Things seem to slow down. One of the reasons things slow down is because actually A2 is a much bigger level of proficiency to progress through. So it's no reflection on anybody's teaching that getting from A2 to B1 is slower than getting from A1 to A2. It's just there's more to get through. And so with the global scale of English and that numerical scale, this is reflected in the number of points within each of those levels. So you can see that A2 goes from 30 to 42, whereas A1 will go from 22 to 29. So it's a smaller range. Another advantage of having the numerical measurement of proficiency is even A1, but particularly A2 or B1. B1 covers a lot of different proficiency ranges. And so if somebody is 58, people say that's a B1. And if people are 44, it's a B1. But they're at different ends of B1. So again, that numerical scale enables us to dig into proficiency in a bit more detail. And also it helps to motivate our learners, because that impression that you're not making progress because your test seems to demonstrate that you're always B1 year after year after year, and no matter how much the teacher tells them you are making progress, it's not reflected in that B1 grading. And so if you can show that they are 43 and then they're 47 and then they're 52, there they can see, okay, B1, but I'm a different B1. I am improving. So how do we plan for progress? How do we plan for progress? So this little diagram here is really to illustrate kind of those theories that you might know as ZPD, so zone of proximal development, or I+1. So, you know, there's a lot of research gone into the fact that learning occurs when students are given an appropriate level of challenge. Too difficult, and they'll just disengage. They won't be able to cope with it. Too easy, and they won't be making progress. If I think about my somewhat lamentable Japanese language learning, I can say, pleased to meet you. What's this? How much does it cost? And I repeat those frequently and can say them beautifully. But I'm not making any progress because I'm not being challenged with more difficult language functions. So what we are supporting teachers with the global scale of English is the proficiency levels of language functions. So very like the Common European Framework and the can-do statements, they are leveled according to difficulty. And so as a teacher, if you know where your students are starting, roughly, then you know what is an appropriate level of challenge. So for this learner here, they're starting around A2, a low A2. So you're probably in your teaching going to be recapping some of what's happened in A1, high A1, but you want to push them into A2, A2 plus with the types of materials and language functions that you're teaching. And so with all this in mind, we've been creating the global scale of English learning objectives for about 5 or 6 years now. As I say, building on the Common European Framework. And I'm now going to link out to the website. So anybody who joined maybe a little bit late, if you can see at the top of your screen, there is a red button that says GSE Teacher Toolkit. If you would like to access the Teacher Toolkit now or wait until after the presentation, that will take you there, and we will give you the link to that toolkit in the chat box regularly throughout. So I am just going to share my screen and go to the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit. So I can now no longer see the chat box, but I'm hoping that you can see my screen on your screen. So this is the GSE Teacher Toolkit that we've developed. I've talked about learning objectives. We're going to look at that in a little bit of detail, but you'll also see here we have grammar and we have vocabulary. So I like to think of this as a one-stop shop for teachers. Everything you need, not everything, but a lot of what you need for lesson planning, you can find in this toolkit. So let's see how you use it. And starting with learning objectives. So the first decision or the first choice you make is what type of learner are you teaching? So we have 4 different sets of learning objectives depending on the type of learner you have. We have young learners. So these are primary and lower secondary, ages roughly 6 to 14. We have adult learners learning general English. We have adult learners learning academic English, and we have adult learners learning English for the workplace, so professional English. So let's start with adult learners. So I've got my learners. Then I want to identify approximately the level of my learners, and these little markers can be moved to identify the level of your learners. Okay, so you move those to identify roughly, probably where your learners are, a little bit below where they are, and then that zone of proximal development. So the next stages of learning you want to address. Now, here's a little tip that you may not know if you've just accessed this yourself. If you see the Common European Framework levels at the top, if you just click on one of those levels, the little markers will automatically isolate that particular level. So click on Show Results, and this will bring up a list of learning objectives for that are appropriate at a B1 level, so 43 to 50 on the global scale of English. You have 172 learning objectives there. That's quite a lot. Maybe you want to just isolate them for a particular skill. So let's look at just speaking, show the results again. And here we have 86, bit of a smaller number, but again, you're probably not going to want to teach, you won't have time to teach all 86. So you can download these, and you can download them in the form of an Excel spreadsheet or of a PDF, and you can select all if you like. So we'll just wait for that to, yes. Or maybe you just want to select the ones that you are going to focus on, and then you can download that and share that possibly with your colleagues. You can share it with the students themselves. With young learners, you might want to share these with the parents. Okay, so looking down this list here, you can see a range of learning objectives. So for example, can ask for, follow and give detailed directions. If you click on this little down arrow here, you'll also find grammar which is related to that particular language function. So this will help you to identify any grammar that you would maybe need to pre-teach, or that you'd need to make sure that your students know in order to give them a chance of being able to do this particular language function. So that's quite a nice link, providing the what we call the enabling skills, so grammar and vocabulary. What grammar would they need to be able to perform this particular language function? So if I just clear this selection here, clear my filters. Just one other thing to show you with, or a couple more things to show you on the adult. So, sorry, don't forget to choose your learner. Show your results. Okay, you'll see that we have a little button here, find a course book. And this would help you as a teacher if you were looking for materials to use for your learners who are at this approximate level of proficiency. I can see a few of you must be on the site. It's quite slow. So there were 18 possible courses that match that search. And you can scroll down and then add these to your wish list. This will take you to a page where that wish list can then be sent to your local Pearson representative, who will get back to you with more information about that particular course. You clear that filter again. And then one final thing within adult learners, I just looked at a learning objective for directions there. Maybe you already had the idea that you wanted to teach something about directions. So you could just key into that free type-in box, call up the results, and you can see we have 15 learning objectives, all dealing with directions at different levels of proficiency and for different skills. So again, this will help you to identify and maybe plan progress. So obviously you're not going to cover directions once with your students. You'll cover it multiple times as they progress to different levels of proficiency. And so this will help you to identify, okay, we've done understanding simple directions, and now we want to move on to giving simple directions, or giving directions with a bit more detail. Let me get rid of that. Finally, for adults, you will see we can either select the 4 skills, as we call them, listening, reading, speaking, and writing, or you have an option to select communicative categories. Now, communicative categories is terminology from the Common European Framework, and it's a way of grouping similar learning objectives across those 4 skills and across different levels of proficiency. And if anybody has been following Common European Framework developments, you will know that they have recently added a whole series of new learning objectives around something called mediation. We can't go into those in too much detail today, but things like collaborating or synthesizing information, translating, and you'll see that all of these can be found in the Teacher Toolkit under the communicative categories. Young learners, it's a very similar approach. So again, we can search by a particular skill. But what you will notice when we look at young learners is these learning objectives have been created with the reality of the young learner classroom in mind. So we're singing songs, we're playing games. These are not things you will find in the Common European Framework. These are not things you will find in the adult set of learning objectives. These have been tailored to the needs of young learners, primary and lower secondary level. If you're teaching academic learners, so select your academic learners. Let me clear that filter. Again, you can select by reading, writing, listening, speaking, or you might want to look at particular academic skills. So academic discourse, text strategies. Let's look at composition. So composition, clearly about writing essays, writing different types of text, developing an argument. You can drill down. And this will bring you up a set of related learning objectives which address that function of developing an argument. So it's just another way to maybe facilitate your searches, make your searches more targeted in the Teacher Toolkit, rather than just looking through all. I mean, there are a lot of learning objectives in here. We have probably around 4,000 learning objectives across all the different users now. So I'm showing you these little search options to help make your life a bit easier. Then you can find more quickly what you're looking for. So finally, for learning objectives, let's have a quick look at professional learners. And again, professional learners, you can choose by the 4 skills, or you could choose by business skills. So, meetings, negotiating, discussing, that's an option. The one thing that I did want to show you here was we've done some work in the past couple of years around identifying the language functions which are required for particular jobs. So if you click on this option for job roles, you can see a whole range of different job families here, professional areas. And if we click on, for example, business and financial operations, again, you can drill down even further into specific jobs. So let's imagine you've got a short course you're teaching for accountants. Select accountants, pull up your results, and you will receive a set of, okay, so here we have 24 learning objectives, and these are language functions which particularly target the needs of accountants. Obviously, you may still want to teach them like basic greetings and general English, but for example, writing short business reports or understanding graphs and charts. This will help you to identify very often for specific professions or professional courses. They're often short. You've only got a few weeks. You've got limited amount of time. What's the best return on their investment? Well, I'm suggesting that if you look at these language functions, you know that these are skills that they will need in their jobs. So that's a whistle-stop tour of learning objectives. Let's quickly look at grammar. So we have grammar, and quite logically, this is just segmented by grammar topics, terms that I'm sure you're all familiar with. So you can select a particular category, particular subcategory. And there we go. We have 18 learning objectives which are related to making requests, offers, giving permission at different levels of proficiency. And again, as we had with the learning objectives, we link the grammar back to language functions. So if you're teaching a particular lesson, you're focusing on the grammar, but you want to be able to contextualize it within a typical language function, this will give you some ideas of how you could build out your lesson plan, some activities around what the particular language function is here. All the grammar learning objectives come with simple examples of usage as well. And then you can see here this little icon, a little folder icon. If you click on that, you'll be given a list of free resources which you can use to supplement your own resources for teaching grammar. So these are worksheets, there's some lesson plans, some answer keys that you can just print off as PDFs. They're all free to use. Did I mention this was free to use? This is free to use. The GSE Teacher Toolkit is free today. It will be free tomorrow. It will always be free. That is our commitment. This is how we are supporting teachers in teaching English language. You don't even have to register for the website. You can just go in and make use of all the resources and the research that we've carried out. Now, finally, vocabulary. And I was telling my colleagues that I'm positioned, if you, certainly in the UK now, TV interviews, everybody who's interviewed seems to be in front of a bookcase. And so this has become known as the vanity bookcase, which is supposed to demonstrate how intelligent you are because you read. But I'm not sure if it's in sight, but you can probably see on my bookshelf quite a number of dictionaries. That's not because particularly I like spending time reading dictionaries, but I did spend 20 years as a dictionary writer. So I joined Pearson 17 years ago to work in the dictionary department. So vocabulary is one of my passions. So I'll try and keep this short, but I could talk forever on vocabulary. The databases, vocabulary, we have 2 vocabulary databases. One for adult learners, one for young learners. And again, we've separated them out because these are learners with different needs, and we wanted to tailor the information to the needs of the learner. So adult learners, this database is pretty extensive. There are 37,000 words and phrases, all with examples, and I'll show you, all come with audio pronunciations. So you can either search for a word, for example, let's take a simple word like ball. And you can see we have different entries for ball at different levels of proficiency. So obviously ball is a polysemous word. It has different meanings, and those meanings you would teach, or you would expect a learner to know at different levels of proficiency. So the very basic sports, a football, for example, that's the first one. a ball of paper. What's the example we've got in here? A ball of wool, something rolled into a ball shape, is obviously something you would teach at a higher level. Going to a ball, not a word we use terribly often these days, but a social event, so, you know, a dance. And so each meaning of a word has been rated. I don't have time to go into the methodology, but the leveling of the words is a combination of frequency in the language and teacher rating of how useful this word is for language learning. And so we've ordered these words so you can see, is this an appropriate sense to be teaching to my students? I mentioned audio pronunciations. You can see these little icons here. I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear this. I have no idea if you could hear it. But we have the pronunciation in American English and in British English. So you can check pronunciation there. Let's get rid of that. But I think the great thing about this database is that all the vocabulary is divided up into different topics. So you can see here a range of different topics. And so if we look at natural world and the environment, and maybe environmental issues, something that we frequently teach. If I take that, accept that, and then show results, this will give me environmental related vocabulary, again at different levels of proficiency, again with audio examples, and again with dictionary examples and collocations. So if I look at power, nuclear power, power generation, wind power, solar power, gives you the common collocations for that word. One thing I would say about the vocabulary database, so let me find, I think I found the word pollution when I was looking. There it is, yes, pollution. GSE 45, a B1. So having spent 20 years writing dictionaries, can I say hand on heart that pollution is a B1 word and you should not teach it at A2? Obviously, no. You can't say that. Vocabulary doesn't work like that. The needs of the learner do not work like that. So the way I would encourage you to use the vocabulary is to see the range from the lowest and most frequent words to the highest and least frequent words. See the range and then pitch your vocabulary selection as you think appropriate for your learners. So you get the big picture and you can see which are the most frequent, which are going to be most helpful for my learners. Quickly, if I go to young learners, and this is for primary level learners, if I just search for the same information that we searched for before, ball, we just have the one meaning of ball for young learners. So the database is much smaller, it's much more directed towards the needs of young learners. And again, if you look at the topic list, these are topics that are more common in the young learner classroom. So with that, I'm going to cancel there. I'm going to head back to the webinar. Bear with me. And I think hopefully now you can see my screen again. So I'm just going to quickly, and we probably won't be able to go through all of these, but I mentioned that my colleague Sarah Davila was also contributed to this presentation, and she has designed up some lessons using the GSE learning objectives. And as we always say, you know, we'd love to be able to wave a magic wand and this all creates a lesson automatically. that's not the reality. So when you're designing lessons with the global scale of English, the GSE Teacher Toolkit and the GSE database can give you the language functions, can give you the communicative skills, can help you select the grammar and vocabulary appropriate for your learners, and can show you the relative difficulty of those particular language functions, grammar and vocabulary. But you as the teacher also need to bring in, your experience, your context, the relevance of the content. You have to select content which is relevant for your learners. You know how much time you have. And whilst most of us are using the communicative approach to language teaching, the global scale of English learning objectives are not only appropriate for a communicative approach to language teaching. So whichever methodology you're using, that's great. The global scale of English will provide you with the clear learning objectives to inform your lessons, your syllabus, your curriculum. One thing I didn't mention when I was talking about learning objectives was the value of sharing the learning objectives with the learners themselves. There's quite a body of evidence which suggests that if you share the learning objectives with your learners, if they know what it is they're doing and why they're doing it, that does have a positive impact on the learning outcome. So they're more likely to learn what your intention is to teach them. So online interaction. So Sarah created these lessons for an online platform. Young learner, we'll maybe just look at a couple, but for young learners, again, using the GSE Teacher Toolkit, she found this learning objective, which is at a low A2. This is the very beginning, so high A1 is also possible. A2 goes from 30 up to 35. Compose simple greetings or messages online using basic fixed expressions. So the context here is supporting each other, sharing their lives, even more important now that the children aren't actually being able to socialize together. And the content is around updates from their life at home. And the instruction time can be flexible depending on how long you have for your lesson. So the idea is that you get your students to take pictures of 4 things in their home and then share these on whatever class forum you're using. Maybe you have WhatsApp groups or Facebook groups, or you have a learning management system where they can post these photos. If they don't have easy access to cameras or to phones, get them to draw. Get them to draw 4 things in their home and then maybe ask mum or dad to then take the photo and then post it. And because this is a lowish level, high A1, low A2, and it was the learning objective specified using basic fixed expressions, then you want to provide them with the sentence structures that they can use. So this is I like it because, and so keeping it really simple. If you want to do this with a slightly older group of students and you want to increase the level, then remove the scaffolding, remove the support. So let them write their own descriptions. And then when you come to the online lesson, then you have your group of students, you unmute students, 3, 4 at a time, get them to share the photos that they've seen on the class forum, and then one student would ask another student to tell them about the photo that they've seen. So here's some very simple speaking practice that they can do online following these very carefully scaffolded sentence structures. And again, there's some tips there encouraging students to draw the picture if they want to, and asking students to support each other in if there's a chat function. So, using emojis, great job, I love it, just encouraging them to interact maybe as they would in the classroom, and you're constantly saying shh, 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 shh. The great thing about a chat is that it doesn't disrupt the class too much. You can see it going on in the side. And then just very quickly, a slightly older, and I wanted to show this example because I think it's a really great example for the time in which we're living now. This is a younger adult and secondary level, I would say, a secondary level student. Again, we have the learning objective, which has been found in the Teacher Toolkit, can make short descriptive online postings about everyday matters, social activities and feelings with some simple key details. So this is a higher level. This is 42. It's A2 plus. Actually, B1 starts at 43. So this is almost B1. And this idea comes from actually one of the courses that we have at Pearson. And it's talking about everyday heroes. And again, you think about the instruction time, actually quite flexible, but Sarah here is suggesting, an hour's preparation ahead of the class and then an hour online. And what this activity is getting them to do is looking online, so doing some research. So you're also encouraging the digital literacy skills that are key to the future. Looking online for examples of everyday heroes, and I'm assuming that wherever you are in the world, there's a lot of this online and in the news at the moment. I know every Thursday night, so last night, 8 o'clock, we're outside our houses clapping the key workers and the everyday heroes, the care workers, the doctors, the nurses, the supermarket, people working in supermarkets, transport, and of course teachers who are still taking in some of the students of key workers and are continuing to teach online and ensure that our children are still getting educated. So go online, find these examples of everyday heroes, and then post using a very just a short summary of what they found in the news. So a good summarizing skill, which is part of these mediation skills I was talking about earlier. Get them to post it. And then when you come to the class time, where you maybe want to focus on the speaking, then students will take it in turn to ask another student, or they've looked at other students' summaries and they've picked the one that really they thought was the best and say why. And again, we've got some tips and some criteria to think about as you're running that session. There is an example in here for professional. Obviously, it's professional. It's a higher level. It's B1, almost B1 plus, around researching the marketing messaging for a company online. And again, this will come with tips and suggestions. I'm flicking slowly through the slides so that if you would like to look into these a bit more, then you have the recording that will be sent to you after this. And very briefly, so we have a website, very easy to remember, english.com/GSE, lots of information on there. And on there, you'll find a blog, and the blog will give you lots of articles written by me, by Sarah, by other contributors around how do you practically use global scale of English in your classroom to support your teaching, be it online at distance, or, as I said, when all of this is over, back in the classroom with your students in a more familiar setting. And that was the website, english.com/GSE. We are getting very close to the end, and I'm just going to see if there were any questions that came up. I'm looking. I can't see any. I'm looking to see if one of our administrators has. I can see 6 things. Is there anybody here? Please share the free resources too, and then we need to speed up. Oh, I was being told to speed up there. Okay, I don't see any questions coming through our moderators. So if anybody, I'm going to try and scroll through the chat to see if there was any questions I can see here. Okay, I'm seeing some very nice comments that, yes, so if people already were familiar with the Teacher Toolkit, actually there's a lot in there and not everybody has used all the search functions. One thing I'd like to say is go try it out and keep coming back, because this is ongoing development and we've got some quite exciting things that I'm not really allowed to talk about today because they're still under wraps, but there will be some great new tools added to the Teacher Toolkit later this year. So please do keep coming back to see. Okay, I'm having trouble scrolling through here. You see my it's useful. Okay, thanks for all the positive comments. I'm seeing, let me have a look here. Can you give us some background on how you created the learning objectives? Okay, so the learning objectives we created, so we wrote them at Pearson, but then people like you, real teachers, real people, as I like to call them, rated the learning objectives for the level of proficiency. This follows very closely the methodology used for the Common European Framework, whereas the Common European Framework research was back in the 1990s and was carried out in Europe and more precisely in Switzerland. We have engaged with thousands of teachers from over 50 countries around the world. So we collect all the data in, and where the teachers agree 80% of the time, then we assign that value to the global scale of English learning objectives. So it's based on teacher experience of teaching at that level. Should the teacher take GSE tests? Why not? We have lots of official assessments that you will find on the Pearson website that report on the global scale of English, and these can be from the very formal tests which are proctored and that you go to a test center to take. We also have more formative style tests which can be used in the classroom with teachers to help monitor progress throughout the year. But again, I would recommend going to the Pearson website or asking your local Pearson sales rep about that. Is there any divergence between GSE and CFR? Yes. So the GSE contains all of the Common European Framework can-do statements. So everything that's in the CFR, including the new mediation and online interaction can-do statements, have been included in the global scale of English with a GSE value. And we have, we collaborate with the Council of Europe, who created Common European Framework. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the global scale of English scale is based on the original Common European Framework underlying scale. So they are perfectly aligned. It's just expressed numerically as opposed to using the letter system. Is it possible to use it with young learners? Well, if it is the GSE, then yes, it is. One of the issues with Common European Framework is that it was developed for adults and young adults. So actually, a lot of the language functions, the singing, the songs, the playing, the games, were not available in the Common European Framework. So we have a whole set of learning objectives for young learners. You'll find them in the Teacher Toolkit, and you will also find the PDF, so the full set printed that you can print out in your virtual goodie bag, which will be sent to you after this. So with that, we will come to a close. This is the very last day of Pearson Spring Days. There is one more closing plenary at 2 o'clock, so in 2 hours, with Dr. Ken Beattie. You don't want to miss that. And as I said, after this, you will be sent a recording, you'll be sent your certificate, and you will be sent your virtual goodie bag. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention today. Thank you for all the comments. Thank you for the questions. And please go and explore the Teacher Toolkit and let us know what you think. Thank you so much.